So we'll try to have an interesting and dynamic discussion today. I don't have to remind everyone that EU-Ukraine relationship, both political and trade, have been higher on the agenda for the last, I don't know how many decades, and especially starting 2014, when we had a major change in the history of our country, and when we signed the association agreement and the intrinsic DCFTA, Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Area with the European Union. And before we start this dynamic and I believe interesting panel, I would like to introduce all the distinguished speakers at this panel. And I will start with the government sector. We have, I think, a very good representation of different strata of the society at this panel: the government sector, the business association, and the companies themselves. And I will start with the Ukrainian government. Since I'm Ukrainian, I'm going to indulge myself with that. And I would like to introduce the trade representative of Ukraine and Deputy Minister of Economic and Trade Development, Ms. Nataliya Mykolska. Yeah, applause is always nice. Then it is my honor to introduce you to EU Ambassador to Ukraine, Mr. Hughes Mingarelli. And the Undersecretary of State of Finland and the Deputy Minister of Foreign Trade, Mr. Marko Kenanen. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Now, we have representatives of one of the European and national Ukrainian business associations. It is my pleasure представити.
It's my pleasure to introduce an ex-Prime Minister of Ukraine and the Chairman of the Association of Entrepreneurs and Industrialists of Ukraine, Mr. Kinach.
The biggest national association of French businesses, Ms. Géraldine Lamblay. And we have representatives of the private sector, as I promised you. So we have, first of all, I think, yeah, we all on the panel. Great. We have the Managing Director of BASF in Ukraine and the 100-country cluster for Eastern Europe, Mr. Andres Lier. And we have the CIA Regional Head of Acino Pharmaceutical Group from Switzerland, Mr. Євгеній Заїка. Я буду така калька, українсько-англійська калька. So, I think I'm going to start from, since we're talking about EU-Ukraine level, I'm going to start with the government level. І перейду на українську, тому що я хочу перше запитання задати торговому представнику України.
I'd like to put the first question to the Deputy Minister of Trade and Economic Development of Ukraine, Ms. Mykolska. A lot of time has passed since the association agreement has been signed, and it was not become effective immediately, but starting from 14-15, Ukraine got some preferences within the framework of the free trade zone. And as an individual who works on these issues annually, what has changed since 2014? Whether we can compensate somewhat the markets of the CIS which we have lost, and whether you can see certain progress, and please give us more details. Thank you very much. I'm going to demonstrate a couple of slides because I am used to the numbers. As far as the trade agreement is concerned, it has become effective for 1 year and 9 months, and we can see quite good results of the implementation of this agreement. As for me, the relations of Ukraine with the EU in the area of trade and the economic area is win-win strategy, and the free trade zone with the EU gives an opportunity to sign more export contracts for Ukrainian companies outside this country. If you look at the numbers, EU really is our trade partner, and well, I have the slides in English, but I'm speaking in Ukrainian so that it's more eligible. $9.4 billion, this is the export to the European Union from Ukraine within 6 months. These are goods and services, but if we look at the statistics for the last 7 years, because here we have only the goods, the export is growing, and the growth rate on goods is 26%. And if we look at the size of the share of the EU in our export, it's 37.5%. And this is sufficiently large as a segment of export. But now I'd like to talk about what the free trade agreement with the EU gave to Ukraine. Usually we talk about the macroeconomic things, but I would like also to talk about what business has got just out of this free trade agreement. In 2017, there appeared 870 trade positions, new trade positions, which we export to the EU from the companies which export in 2017. In comparison what happened in 2016, the share has increased by 25%. We are saying that not only the numbers which illustrate the export increases, but the number of companies which get benefits from the free trade agreement. And the next important element is the following. Ukraine at present is the guarantor of the food security in the EU. What does that mean? It means that we are top 10 suppliers of agro foods and agro products and foods to the EU. And a lot of people criticize us that we supply the commodities, the raw materials, but one of the biggest items of our export is the oil. Seed oil. Is this the commodity? No, it's just the processed oil. Also, the Ukrainian butter export is increasing. Ukraine is number 2 supplier of the butter to the EU after the New Zealand, which actually leads this sector all over the world. And there is a good example, Ukrainian ice cream. The export is growing. Ukrainian companies are present at the markets of the EU. Also the flour and confectionery and pastries. And every month we see new goods which are exported there with the added value. And everybody is saying, oh, we are like a commodity country, agrarian country. I can agree with that, because apart from the value-added goods from the agrarian sector, we also send the industrial goods to the market of the EU. And whether we were able to substitute the CIS market, it's very important for us that the companies which were exported only to Russia and CIS now supply the EU. This is energy machine building and locomotive spare parts. And we can see that the investment of EU into the industrial sector, the automobile constructing cluster is growing constantly. And among the goods, industrial goods, we have the highest growth, 200% growth of the electric heaters for the water to Europe, and this is a good with the added value, and the demand is increasing. And definitely we consider that the free trade agreement with EU is a factor which allows us to attract investment, and we can be quite frank and open with that. And these are investments not only from the EU. We have investments from China, from Japan, from the Emirates, from the Persian Gulf countries, from the Middle East, and they are investing into the industries which supply goods to the European Union market. Also, one of the advantages of our relations with the EU at present is the following. We are considering our relations in the three-dimensional plane, and we give an opportunity to the Ukrainian companies to become part of the added value chain. And those who do exports, you know that we are trying to access the convention of Euromed. This is extremely important convention for those who is producing goods, and we hope that it will give a new impetus to our relations. And the last item I would like to mention, we can see a huge niche for ourselves where we can continue working, and it's the export of services. Because if we can compare the export of telecommunications services from Ukraine to the North American countries and EU, so the size of the well, the opportunity to increase is very impressive.
Basically ask the same question. Do you, from the EU side, see progress, see increase in trade, bilateral investment? Do your businesses or your statistic report it as beneficial for the European Union private sector? Please.
First of all, good afternoon, everybody. After 2 terrible years for the Ukrainian economy, 2014 and 2015, we have seen an improvement, obviously. The macro financial stabilization, a number of structural reforms in 2016, and clearly as a result, we have seen an increase in trade as well. And to give just one figures, because this is not about a discussion about statistics, in the first 6 months of 2017, there has been an increase of about 25% of the export of Ukraine toward the EU market. So there is clearly an improvement. But again, the improvement is mainly due to the fact that 2014 and 2015 had been very, very bad years for the Ukrainian economy and therefore for the Ukrainian export. Still, we consider that the provisional application of our deep and comprehensive free trade agreement almost 20 months ago now gave an impulse, an impetus to trade and investment between the EU and Ukraine. First point. Second point, despite the fact that we started to implement this agreement 20 months ago, today we are late in the most important components of this agreement. This agreement is not mainly about quota or about tariff. For a country like Ukraine, which is a WTO member, tariff is no longer the main obstacle to trade with the main trade partners. The main obstacle to trade between Ukraine and any big partner, in particular the EU, is about non-tariff barriers, norms and standards. And therefore, we have to focus the implementation of our DCFTA on regulatory convergence. We have to do everything together, the Ukrainian partners and the EU, to ensure that there is an harmonization of the Ukrainian laws, norms and standards with the EU one. And I can say that because we have been doing that for 25 years with other countries. Countries of Central Europe, which today are members of the EU, countries of the Western Balkans and Turkey, who have an EU membership perspective. This is today our agenda, not to negotiate another agreement, not to look for any kind of other trade arrangement, such as a customs union, but to implement the DCFTA when it comes to regulatory convergence. If we manage to ensure that in the next few months and years, Ukraine takes over l'acquis communautaire, namely our laws, norms and standards, the Ukrainian economy will progressively become part of the EU single market, which means that Ukrainian companies will be able to export to the EU without facing any obstacle. This is what we should be working on, and we are here to assist the Ukrainian authorities, the government, but the Rada as well, because the Rada has a key role to play to take over these EU laws, norms and standards.
Great, thank you. Well, again, sounds like some good news and some still homework to do. Undersecretary Kennan, I want to now direct question to you. And again, it's a similar question. From a perspective of someone on the forefront of trade, of a European country, do you see progress since 2014 in trade with Ukraine in bilateral investment relations as well? And, you know, it's not a secret as well that it's not only that DCFTA and association agreement happened in 2014, it's also the Russia situation, if you will, which of course was very sensitive especially for Finland, given the historical trade and economic relationship with the Federation. Now, can you kind of lay out generally the situation for Finland after 2014, and particularly in your trade and economic relationship with Ukraine?
Okay, dobro dня. I fully agree with the...
Can you use your microphone, please?
Okay. Dobro dня. I fully agree with the previous
Let me help you with that just a second, because they need that for translation.
Okay.
You want to have it closer.
I fully agree with the previous speakers on the importance of these free trade agreements. Actually, for Finland, in many countries, after these agreements have entered into force, our trade has nearly doubled. It has not happened yet with Ukrainian agreement. We have there one homework to do, I think, in all EU member states to make these free trade agreements known better to our companies. I fully also agree with the view that this regulatory part of these agreements is more and more important nowadays, and we fully support Ambassador when he said that these agreements must be now implemented. As regards our trade with Ukraine, it has declined quite radically after this crisis, but figures before it were quite remarkable. So I see there a lot of potential when we can come back to the better investment climate, and then when this free trade agreement has been implemented. As regards Russia, I could say perhaps that yes, these sanctions, they affected us, but the decline in trade started already before the crisis, and that is due to lack of reforms in Russian economy. So the actual impact of sanctions as such has been very big, and it has been big on agricultural sector, but that was more due to the counter sanctions than European sanctions. Finland has been all the time fully, we have supported fully this sanction regime. As a small nation, we understand that the international rules must be obeyed. But at the same time, we have kept contacts open to Russia on all levels, because there are a lot of problems with the companies, some problems with our investments, and problems with citizens. We have to keep these channels open. We have 1,300 kilometers of common border. In Finland, what we did actually that during the Cold War years even, that we tried to use all the possibilities to open our trade towards the West. First we had the EFTA agreement, 61, then we had a free trade agreement with EEC, 73, and then finally European Economic Area agreement in the early 90s. So that every sovereign state has to have the right to choose the path we want to choose. One last point, actually, Finland and Ukraine, we belonged both to Russian Empire, actually. We got our independence 100 years ago. We were a poor country 100 years ago. But I would say that through open trade agreements, through education, and through rule of law and equality, we have been able to get the well-being where we are now. Finally, I would say that if it's possible for us, it must be possible for Ukraine as well. Especially when I just noticed some new DNA statistics. Actually, half of the Finnish DNA originates from Ukraine.
Great, thank you. I think the most important takeaway for me personally from this was, if it's possible for Finland, it surely should be possible for Ukraine. That's a great point to follow up. Переходжу на українську. Анатолій Кирилович, питання до вас. Ви маєте
A question to you, Mr. Kinach. You have quite unique experience of the top-level state official, but on the other hand, you have a macro view of the production sector in Ukraine. What is your evaluation of the situation starting from 2014, from the point of view of trade and investment? Do you see any progress? Can we, substitute the lost markets, and what needs to be done to the benefit of the Ukrainian business? Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, participants of this panel and the audience. The fact that Ukraine faces the unprecedented challenges and threats, it's a fact of life. And actually, Ukraine simultaneously is protecting its civilizational choice, territorial integrity, and sovereignty. And at the same time, Ukraine has to actually deal with the phenomena of the systemic crisis phenomena in all the areas of our life. And it's very important for me, not only for me personally, but the fact that in spite of all these difficulties, on the 1st September this year, an unprecedented important event has occurred.
The final ratification of the association agreement and its implementation in full, both in economic and political part. I'm not going to talk too much about this period starting from 2014. I'm not going to quote too many numbers, but the only thing that I would like to remind is that due to the war in the East, the loss of almost 25% of our industrial potential, including export, Ukraine, in 2014, 2015, had the GDP drop minus 17% in just 2 years. And I'm fully supporting what colleague said, is that now our base for comparison is very low. And we see that in the current year, the forecast is up to 2%, and the draft budget for the following year is up to 3 years. These are absolutely not something that Ukraine needs to ensure the efficient dynamics of development, especially in the context of life quality for citizens. And Ukraine needs goals which would envisage, and of course the methods and the specific work, growth of at least 6, 8, or even 10%, so that we could feel positive changes. This is a separate topic, but this is something that should be there in the center of our attention strategically in our whole country, authorities, business, economy, everything. And several conclusions, they are not just mine, these are the conclusions of expert community and a huge amount of business associations in Ukraine. You can't really look at the ratification Ukraine-EU as a finish. It is only just a start. This is the beginning of very long and very hard and responsible work. And we should clearly understand that even though we have come closer to the cooperation with the European Union on the principles of 4 freedoms, and we are forming an open economy, but in market economy, the deciding powers given to competitiveness. Such phenomena as cooperation was, is, and will be in the long-term perspective, and it is to this that the attention of the Ukrainian state should be turned to. But here, unfortunately, we have the association agreement, we don't have the strategy, we don't have sectoral programs, especially for such directions as, for example, harmonization, adaptation of technical regulations and standards. Because for Ukrainian conditions, this is not just harmonization, this is the demand for economic modernization for all of its components. And this is investment climate, this is resources. And such programs should be developed, also including the experience of our neighbors. Other Eastern European countries that already made this way and have some serious positive results, starting from Poland, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and others. For example, the issue of infrastructure, which has huge significance for the state's competitiveness, doing business and involving investments. Presently, it is no secret that actually our infrastructure is in great state of infrastructure. I've been asking for, not in the first year, please show me at least one serious program, especially the program of public-private partnership on restoring the carriages and trains of Ukrzaliznytsia, where the locomotives have been worn out for 92% and the passenger carriages for 83%. It's at the expense of the budget. It's impossible to do. But we have to create the conditions to involve private investments. And we know some European parties are ready to cooperate with us, but such programs are simply non-existent, and this is a very serious risk. And we also have to take into account the geographic location and the transit potential. And there are lots of transport corridors also passing through Ukraine. If there is no infrastructure, these corridors are going to be around us. And actually, I'm happy to see our partners from the European Union and the EU ambassador as well, because we also have a threat of losing energy resources. And even though Ukraine has ratified the Energy Charter, and everything is done to be left in the status of energy transitor, we can also see that at least the spirit of routes, at least at the southern and the northern flow, where in 2020, 2021, we're just going to lose the status. And this is going to have some serious consequences for geopolitical standoff as well. And I would also accept it. And I have hope for cooperation with our European colleagues. Actually, yesterday I was in Warsaw, and we were looking at this issue. That would be competition for labor resources. Ukraine is now at the stage of huge, wide-scale labor migration, which is looking at all the generations, starting from the young people. And very often our partners, our investors, who have the wish and the possibility to invest in Ukraine, they already face a huge problem. Impossible to hire qualified labor force. Unfortunately, these people have left and they are working outside of Ukraine due to the great difference in the standards of payment and all that. And this is also the issue that we have to solve. And I would totally agree with our colleagues in the EU, and we have to look for the balance of interest, including our homework that has to be directed at creating some favorable conditions for Ukrainian citizens working in Ukraine. And just to finish this part, answering the question of the moderator, all this is going to depend, of course, on the investment climate. And I'm sure that the European Union and our partners, especially when we're already in this specific stage of our cooperation after ratification of the association agreement, they have to increase the level of requirements from the point of bilateral obligations. Especially the requirements about ensuring the rule of law, protection of owner rights, investor rights, these indicators which we have now, the latest one. And actually, the economic freedoms, the indicator of ranking to protect the rights for private property, I mean, they are not just degrading these results. 100 out of 137 countries in the ranking for protecting the private property rights, Ukraine is now on the 128th position, and that is a very serious negative signal for investors. And it's about actually not just the change in the situation, but changing the requirements. We have to move away from these declarative calls that lead to nothing and saying that we have ratified the association agreement. We have to be more strict, more pragmatic in our work, and we have to do our homework. And actually, we're going to develop as a competitive European and democratic state. And this is going to be our common goal. Thank you. Thank you, Anatoly.
Language, Geraldine. I would like to ask you a question as someone, who works on the French business's international agenda daily, once again. Very simple. Has Ukraine been on the radar lately? If not, why do you think, and what we can do? And if so, if you can elaborate a little bit on what projects, what industries French businesses are interested in Ukraine or with Ukraine, that'd be very interesting.
Well, thank you, Nicholas. And thank you, first of all, for allowing me to come back once more to this magnificent city, KIEF, which is one of the most beautiful in Europe after Paris. And thank you as well, Mr. Kinar.
That deserves applause, I guess.
And thank you, Mr. Kinar, because we are partners for a long, long time, for more than 25 years now with the ULIE, with USPP. And this is quite important to have a long-term partnership with such an association as yours. Coming back to your question, Nicholas, I would like to say that, of course, Ukraine is on the radar for the past 25 years, 26 years to be exact. And for you to understand what is MEDEF, it is the French Business Confederation. It gathers about 900,000 companies in France. This is the most representative. This is the counterpart with the government whenever we have discussions about social, about business environment. And of course, we promote long-term and inclusive partnerships abroad, of course, with Ukraine. And we have been very active for the past years with predecessors of the government in order to better understand what French companies can do in Ukraine. It has been difficult, and nonetheless, French companies are still here, notwithstanding the crisis and all what happened. And to be concrete, I will give you some figures. Today, France is the fifth international investor in Ukraine and the third on the European level. It's about 160 French companies which have invested in Ukraine for the past years. It's $1.7 billion US, and France is the first international employer in Ukraine. So yes, we are definitely present in Ukraine, and we want to invest more. We have recent investments, maybe you've heard about. It's in the engineering sector, this is Aegis, in the pharmaceutical and medical sector with Biocodex. And then this year, you have Auchan and Leroy Merlin, for those who knows, and Nexans. This is a cable, this is a telecommunication cables, high-tech. They opened very recently a new plant in Ukraine, and FM Logistic, about logistic hubs. So definitely French companies go on coming to Ukraine and investing in Ukraine, but of course this is not easy, and I'm joining what you were talking about, Mr. Kinar, about implementation of the reforms, about the PPP, which is quite important. As you know, French companies have a huge experience in building roads and railways and all the transportation infrastructure, and of course the law framework is quite important, and the PPP is what we promote because we have a real know-how in this field. So we are very interested as well in the sustainable cities development, in IT, and I know that in Ukraine there is some clusters with startups and with a real know-how, digital economy, cybersecurity, e-government. We met with Mr. Nefyodov a few days ago. We talked about Prozoro, which is quite an impressive program for Ukraine, and of course agri-food sector and healthcare. So French companies definitely want to develop more partnerships with Ukrainian companies to help them maybe to reach the European standards we were talking about just a few minutes ago.
Great. Well, that sounds really impressive. And, I want to now move on from this I would say, from one flagship of the European Union, which is France, to Germany, but then to private sector, to a specific company. And would like to ask Mr. Lear, I would avoid basically, asking the same question, how do you see Ukraine? Obviously, you're in Ukraine, you're doing business, and I want to go more specific. Nataliya was mentioning that we're trying hard to kind of introduce Ukraine or introduce more into the global value chains. Now, you as one of the biggest companies in the world, probably, do you see realistically Ukraine becoming more engaged in the global value chains, particularly in your sector? And does BASF have these kind of plans for Ukraine? And if so, if you can be public about it, that'd be very interesting.
Yes, thank you for the question, and thank you for being here, and good afternoon also from my side. And I'm pleased to live since almost 5 years in the nicest European city in KIEF. So what I can say from my side. And the question is quite interesting. And me as BASF, head of BASF, and also as president of German-Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce, we are looking, of course, into this topic. But let me start with 3-4 mega trends. And one, of course, is that in the year 2050, there will be additional 2 billion people on Earth. The second one is, of course, this EU association agreement. What is the roadmap for the next 10 years minimum? And a third very important trend, what we currently see, is a shift away from heavy industries toward light industries, what means also modernization. And now coming to the point, to the question, if you look into the Ukrainian economy, and we as BASF, we feel daily, really daily, the pulse of the industry of our customers, we see more and more that these customers are integrating into the European, into the mid-European and Western European value chains. So there are new export destinations, but not only. These companies are also, due to the EU legislation, are pushed to become more competitive on global basis. And for example, a company which has a EU legislation, there are some egg producers, for example, they can import immediately the eggs to China or to Asia. That opens up great opportunities. So looking into this value chain, once again, we see here, for example, the automotive component producers. At the moment, 10,000 workplaces are somewhere in Western Ukraine, and here in Kyiv region, there will be soon 25,000 people working for this component production. This is one big trend we see. Then also we see, of course, for example, food industry. We as BASF, we have a big portfolio of agrochemicals for the commodity part, but we have also chemicals for the higher sophisticated food production. And we see now more and more requests from these companies in order to serve and supply to the European markets, and not only also to Turkish markets, to African markets, and so on. So we see here really integration into new value chains. Appliance goods we see integrating more and more with companies. So there's a lot happening in this sector. And I'm just again touching this point of food industry, for example. It's not a secret that now a lot of retailers are using more and more Ukraine as the intermediate platform in order to serve their entire value chains and companies also in Western Europe. So they are purchasing here already, starting to purchase. Or recently, we are very active in the oil sector of sunflower oil. There are companies coming to us, what to do in order to supply to Africa. We say, Africa, there's food fortification necessary. You have to vitamize your oil. So we are doing this, and suddenly these companies are seeing complete new markets. So there's a lot of potential happening exactly now, in this very moment in the value chains already. Of course, I share what is said here, there's a lot to do. But let me also underline that we see as BASF, and also from the German business, we see a lot of significant improvements and developments already now. And it's now the chance really to continue with developing the value chain, supporting our customers to make them more successful, to modernize this. That is one of our greatest targets as BASF.
Great, thank you. Well, again, one good news after other good news. So, and we're moving to the CIS regional head of Ficino, пан Євген Заїка. Я українською буду. Fine with me. So picking up what was just said by your colleague from the private sector representative, do you, in the pharmaceutical industry, which is, you know, one of the critical, one of the most important, developing, etc., globally, do you see Ukraine possibly being integrated into this value chain, not only as the market where you can produce cheaply or sell more as population grows and become richer, but actually create some more added value facilities in Ukraine, like R&D facilities, for instance, because we know that pharmaceuticals are one of the biggest investors in R&D globally, much more than IT, for instance. Could you please elaborate on that?
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I represent here, let's say, a medium-sized Swiss pharmaceutical manufacturer, Asino Pharma, with turnover of a bit over 300 million euro. And indeed, this is the most difficult and regulated sector of the economy, pharmaceutical. Moreover, if you look from the prospects of EU markets, they are very well protected and regulations are very tough. If to think, you know, exporting right away from Ukraine into EU. I would see the following prospects when it comes to the value chain. First of all, we were brave enough to invest into pharmaceutical sectors 2 years ago, because that was the worst moment of Ukrainian economy, and the market lost like 50% of its value. And moreover, there were no positive forecast going forward. But anyway, since 2 years, then we acquired the plant for the whole group of Asina and for our owners, which are the private equity funds. That was one of the most successful, if not the most successful project. Since that time, we grew substantially in value, in sales here. Moreover, we created more than 200 highly qualified jobs here. We became, when it comes to the value chain, we became a kind of outsourcing hub for our group, where the, let's say, highly qualified and intellect-containing jobs, like in regulatory, in medical, in pharmacovigilance, in SAP integration when it comes to IT, in finance, in financial analysis, they will move to Ukraine. Now, I have like 50 people sitting in our office, but working solely for the group, for Middle East country, for Latin America country, for Africa, and etc. Moreover, our labs, which is one of the state-of-the-art pharmaceutical lab here, they became also a kind of outsourcing service provider, where we take raw material, come into our Swiss plants. We have 5 plants, 3 in Switzerland, 1 in KIEF, 1 in Estonia. And we do all the lab testing in order to prove that these APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients, is exactly the same APIs which is written on the box. So meaning that despite of delivering value and delivering nice EBIT figures and top-line growth here in Ukraine, so we do a lot in jobs creation, in outsourcing. Moreover, we are exporting to CIS countries, including Russia. It's a bit of a roller coaster, needless to say. But we are looking from the prospects to export our product, first of all, Middle East, Africa, and then to Europe, because we need to do a lot in order to comply fully with the European standards and really break that wall, which still exists in pharmaceutical industry. This is basically it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Пані Наталі, повернусь до вас. От дивіться.
I'd like to go back to you, ma'am. And we have good news from where we are part of the value chains, international value chains. The share of our export is increasing to the high technological markets. The companies are growing in Ukraine. But at the same time, we can hear that we have a lot of homework to do as far as the adaptation to the European standards are concerned. And the thing which I've heard, and that seemed to me very important at the plenary meeting, I've heard heard that the leading brains of the planet, the esteemed president of the Roman Club, was saying that we cannot apply free trade instruments which are used by the developed countries of the world to the emerging markets. And what is your opinion? Free trade, the way the EU sees it, is it a win-win situation, or should we make it our own way, using certain tools and instruments to make our sectors more competitive, as Mr. Kynak said? Well, in the government, everybody understands very well that our association agreement with the EU and its implementation is one of the top priorities on which we have to concentrate our attention. Nobody says that we have to stop working after the association has become effective. We have to adapt. We have to live through the process of adaptation. We are moving slowly in some areas. In some areas, we are moving fast. We are discussing the issues with the stakeholders, with the industry, and there are problems in the parliament as well. But we have to implement the free trade agreement because this is an opportunity for the access of our companies to the EU markets. A very important aspect. I would like to allow myself not to disagree with Mr. Ambassador Mingorelli. The quotas are not, well, he said, are not the obstacles of the access of goods to certain markets. Maybe it depends on the size of quotas, but and also the size of duties which are being applied, because for some trades, 5% of the important duty does not really destroy their competitiveness. But if the duty is 14%, it's an obstacle for the companies. But the higher dues could be considered to be even those which impede the trade with the EU. EU is our major trade partner. Even in our export strategy, it is envisaged that this is the market number one for our export. And this is what the Ukrainian industry is talking about, and also producers of food. Everybody understands that. Another important aspect, apart from the homework we have to do in terms of the free trade agreement, we also have to use additional tools and mechanisms which it provides to us. Well, it's the communication between the associations so that they would find their own place in the regional chains of added value, because sometimes it's more profitable to develop the components than the final product, or the other way around. And this is what the business has to decide for itself. But the government has to create the opportunities to carry out these communications and conversations. The standards are very important for us, what Mr. Kynak mentioned, and our next goal is to sign an agreement of the acknowledgement of the standards, and it is envisaged by the association agreement when Ukrainian standardization will be acknowledged for a number of goods in the European Union. It will save funds and money for our manufacturers. Also, it provides predictability for them, and they can enter the EU markets. And Ukraine has done its homework. We have done everything which is envisaged by the association agreement for this, agreement to be signed. And we wait for the signal from the European Union when we can start negotiating on this agreement. Nobody says that we have to sit and wait, that our business will be acknowledged by the Europeans. They will come and say, we are going to buy everything from you. But we have to proactively promote our services and goods into EU markets, and also promotion of Ukraine, which, as a country which is manufacturing top quality goods with the competitive prices. You were mentioning that you were asking what are the challenges in our relations at present and whether we have to protect ourselves. Ukraine, in accordance with the conditions on which we have entered the WTO and also the levels of customs duties, we are an open economy. And the free trade agreement is very beneficial for us with many countries because our transportation potential, geographical position makes Ukraine ideal in principle, a hub to produce the goods and services for the whole market of Europe. And it happened so that our relations with the Russian Federation have been artificially destroyed, and we do not have now an opportunity to supply goods to the Transcaucasian countries who are natural partners of ours. If we look at the geographical position, real economy, we can say that it's very beneficial for Ukraine to work in the free trade regime with as many trading partners as possible. We have to also remember that we have the ways to deal with the subsidized economies which are uncompetitive. Neither our obligations to the WTO, no association agreement, disallows us to use anti-dumping dues and special dues. And this is a question to Ukrainian business, whether Ukrainian business is ready to invest resources to protect itself. European business is ready to do that. At the last hearing, which was initiated by Eurofair, which is mega strong in the European Union, tells us that the work in the European Union of associations, and this is where I would like to emphasize industrial associations, is quite strong, but we don't have it. We don't need those. It's not about the global associations, but sectoral associations who speak one voice and they understand main goals. And I think that this is a street with dual traffic. The government has to do homework, and Ukrainian business has to learn to voice a consolidated position and to be more proactive from the point of view of using the opportunities which the government provides them. And if we look at this audience, do we have representatives of the business here? Well, who visited the site of Ministry of Economic Development ministry within the last months? This is the site of the leading ministry, which is responsible for attracting investment, promoting exports. Who knows about the Office for Promoting the Exports? Yeah, it works. Yeah. So I would like to encourage you to do your own homework, because your business partners are not looking for you. You are looking for the business partners in the external markets. So please get interested what the government can do for you, what the Office of Promoting Export can do to you to enter the international markets. Nobody was saying that the association agreement opened to us the access to the market of public procurement of the EU. And our experience shows that more Ukrainian companies are looking at the possibility to participate in those tenders. And the example, Austrian government announced the tender to procure 7 million euro worth of the uniform for the policemen. And this is a contract, well, it's the 12-month contract, and for the medium-sized Ukrainian enterprise, if they might win this tender, they could provide the order for themselves. So, well, the business has to look at the additional opportunities which are opened by the association agreement to us. One more question about the free trade agreement. We know that we have ratified the agreement of free trade with Canada, and also there were some negotiations with Israel and Turkey. Where are we in those negotiations? In Israel, we are at the finishing phase. Israel is important for us because they have the free trade agreement with the EU, and they are the participants of the Convention of Pan-Euromed, and the triangle might work. Country of Israel, the European Union and Ukraine to develop the regional chains of added value, and from the point of view of attracting European investment of production in Ukraine to supply European market and Israeli market, and also Israeli manufacturers can manufacture goods in Ukraine to supply them to the Israeli market and the EU market. We hope that we will have some progress in the nearest future with Israel, but in Turkey we do not see this, progress, quick progress. But we continue to negotiating because for us, the free trade agreement has sense when it covers as many as possible of industrial and agrarian and goods and foodstuffs. As this agreement is quasi-agreement and it's closed, and this agreement will not work for Ukraine, which is a very open economy. And the policy of the government at present is very pragmatic. We are not signing agreements for trade for political statements or political promotion of our relations. The free trade agreements are economic tools which have to work for Ukrainian export. Thank you very much.
To react to Nataliya's statement that actually tariffs and quotas are sometimes an issue in bilateral trade. But also after that, I would like you to elaborate on the global challenge, especially after what happened in the US, to the global free trade, and particularly there was a hard blow for the EU in terms of TTIP freeze. We hope, not the reversal, but at least temporary state. Could you then start commenting or reacting to Nataliya's statement and then go wider, elaborating on where do you see free trade in the world now?
Alors, despite certain developments in some part of the world that you mentioned, the EU remain committed that free and fair trade, not only free trade, fair trade, remain in the interest of all people around this planet, and therefore we continue on our side to work for opening markets in an orderly way for all our partners. I insist on the fact that for us, tariffs and quota are not the main obstacle to trade. The main obstacle today to Ukrainian export to the EU market are norms and standards, non-tariff barrier to trade. Yes, there are quotas in a number of sectors which are regarded as sensitive for EU producers in agriculture, for fertilizers in industry. We have quota, it's true, but this is not the main issue. The main issue is about regulatory convergence. If we manage to ensure that Ukrainian companies, thanks to the approximation of legislation, will no longer face non-tariff barrier to trades, Ukrainian companies will be able to increase their export to the EU market. More generally, there is a need, obviously, to improve the business climate here. You know that. Ukraine has fantastic assets, an extremely well-qualified workforce, a long industrial tradition, the best agricultural land in the world, in Europe at least, a central location on the European continent. Which other European country has so many assets? And still, foreign investors hesitate to invest in Ukraine. Why? Because the risks are too high. Which kind of risk? Risks which are linked to the absence of the rule of law. Every week, we witness raids on European companies. Almost every week, we witness harassment of companies by law enforcement agencies, such as the tax police of SBU. Our companies do not trust, rightly, courts because of the high level of corruption in the justice. If we manage to establish a decent level of rule of law in this country, foreign companies, including EU ones, will rush to invest in Ukraine because Ukraine has so many assets. And on our side, with our limited means, we try to assist our Ukrainian friends and partners to improve the rule of law and to improve the business environment through deregulation, through facilitate access to credit, through advice delivered to small businesses, through training in reducing the risk which are linked to investment. So we have a large number of policy dialogues and cooperation programs which aim at boosting the development of, in particular, small and medium companies, because we have the feeling, on the basis of our own experience, that it is in the SME area that the potential exists, not in big companies, in traditional sectors, but in small and medium companies, very often in the services sector, where we can exploit the fantastic assets of this country.
Fantastic. And one short question stemming from that. Indeed, as far as I'm concerned, there have been some flexibility on behalf of the European Union in reviewing the quotas and the tariffs, yes, with, of course, I believe the huge contribution from our Ministry of Development and Trade. Do you see, as the representative of the European Union, further flexibility within the European Union to accept further, I would say, changes in this or additions to this agreement?
To be frank, it will be difficult because, as we all know, the EU had just adopted recently additional what we called autonomous trade measures. We have basically increased market opportunities for a limited number of Ukrainian products. And it's clear that there are a few areas where Ukraine could export more if quotas were not what they are. But the EU is facing an economic crisis as well. And you have to be realistic about what you can expect in this area. I'm not telling you that we should not try. But again, as a friend of Ukraine, my advice to my Ukrainian friends is don't focus too much effort on that. Please focus on regulatory convergence. This is the area where you can get the most benefits in the medium term. On quotas and tariff, it will be extremely difficult to get more from the EU in the near future.
Thank you so much. Undersecretary Kennan, now, what kind of feedback do you get Finnish businesses working in or with Ukraine, first? And second, this macro question, free trade, is it the past or the future? Is it the only way or other alternatives?
Yaku, Nicola, I start with the last one.
Okay.
On the free trade, this question is really pertinent, what you raise, and it has been threatened a bit, which means then that all the countries which are for open trade and for participation to value chains, we have to be now very active in promoting and drumming the benefits of open trade. Commission has been here active, and we are supporting very actively Commission as well that we have to get results from WTO ministerial meeting now in Buenos Aires. We have to get new items inside this rules-based system like e-commerce, which is now lacking there. So we have to be active and to bring this open trade agenda forward. There are a lot of protectionist tendencies. Some come even from the European Union side, like the idea of screening investments. We don't like it because we feel that if a member state wishes to screen foreign investments, they can do it on the basis of national legislation. But there are a lot of happening, and we have to be alert. Free trade is not at all dead, actually. I think that this crisis will show to many of us that it's really needed, which then means that even a small country like Finland, we are nowadays much more outspoken for open trade than we were before. So we have to raise our voices. Actually, what was very pertinent also what you said of value chains, because when we studied our exports, resulted that although our most important export destination is Germany, second is Sweden, and third is quite surprisingly actually USA, then Netherlands, and then Russia. But when we look at the added value of our exports, our most important export destinations are China and USA. That is because of value chains. And in order to take part to value chains, we need open trade. we need agreements because all these small gadgets, they come to your country and then they go back somewhere else.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Anatoly Kirillovich, питання...
Anatoly Kirillovich, the question is for you now. Again, a rather global one. Okay, free trade, mixed system, or non-free trade in the world, and where should Ukraine be in this system? And the second, what Nataliya was saying, actually as a representative of the biggest Ukrainian Association of Business, whether we actually have the chance, or do you see the need for a more consolidated voicing of our positions to the government and to actually promote the interest of Ukrainian business, especially by sectors? Thank you. Free trade, just like the story of our civilization, it has our own story. And just very briefly, because we are pressed for time, I would like to remind you that the developed countries the whole world knows, starting from the UK and the US, France. At some stages, when the economy didn't demonstrate competitiveness, there was a very strict policy of state national protectionism. And as soon as the national economies actually went to this level of competitiveness in the whole world, there was a tendency, including economy and globalization and free trade methods. And Ukraine is a young state which fights for its right and place in the world, its place under the sun. It also has to take it into account. And of course, free trade, this is a mix. It has to be a balance of interests, the balance of national interests, first of all. Each state, its main function is to protect national interests, both economic and political ones, but this balance should also be formed on the basis of civilized methods. The methods which do not violate the rule of law, the principles of transparent and free competition. They take into account the balance of interests for the partner, because now we are on this search, and I'm pretty sure that free trade has the right to life. It has to develop, it will develop, but with regard to the previous experience, and each state during its development, including Ukraine, should look for optimal policy on the conditions of free trade in the context of national interest protection. First, secondly, as an example, I totally agree with my colleagues and ambassador that the quotas matter, but we also have to concentrate on what you were saying a bit earlier. This would be the creation of smart and contemporary rules of the game. That's about competitiveness, rule of law, and also investment climate. And this is one of the most important things, and I'm pretty sure that business understanding the meaning of quotas also understands the meaning. It has to be solved only in dialogue with the authorities. Formation of, for example, contemporary export infrastructure, export policy. As an example, we already had a discussion about a year ago why Ukraine still doesn't have an export credit agency. I mean, there are similar structures like this in all developed countries, especially those which have export-oriented economy. And just to report to our foreign participants, presently in Europe, on the European continent, only 3 countries have no similar structure which deals with creating favorable conditions for national exporters. Ensuring risks, access to the credits, participation in the tenders, in public procurement. These are Albania, Moldova, and Ukraine. And I really hope that this year we are going to make a decisive step. And it's also in our plans for 2018 that Ukraine is going to form a contemporary export credit agency, and this is going to be much more important than fighting for quotas. And that is very important. And finally, the last thing. Again, this is about our results for today in the context of an association, trade, goods and services. We would really ask, and that is also the position of Ukrainian business and experts, that we need not just to have this declaration that now we have much more, a bigger share in trade with the EU. Of course, it is important, but it is also important to monitor the quality of this process. what is happening with the Ukrainian economy structure, what kind of balance of interest is there. As an example, just a classic one, would be our agricultural complex. We simply raise our heads before the villages. In spite of the complicated conditions, they still give us high results. And this became a locomotive of Ukrainian economy. About 47% in Ukrainian export, this is the agricultural products. But what is happening about the quality of this result? To actually make these products like grain, wheat and all that, we import 80 to 90% of oil products, mineral fertilizers, plant protection, up to 70% of agricultural equipment. So we sell our raw materials, we get foreign currency income, and we use it to import something that we could actually produce in Ukraine for most of things. And accept the results for absolute things. We have to strictly deal with this system. About localizing industry, about creating joint enterprises, involving and actually raising the potential, doing something that helps the development of Ukrainian agriculture, of course working on contemporary technologies, contemporary standards. So this prospect which creates the irreversibility of positive result and actually decreases the dependence on external situation, we know that really often happens on the global markets. We do value and I totally support the strengthening of dialogue between authority and business, because it has to be there all the time. And there are things to do here, both for the government and the business. And what we have to do is to have the structured civil society. It is CSOs which are able to use civilized methods to protect their own rights, to conduct a dialogue with the authorities, to look for civilized methods to solve rather acute problems together, and of course consolidate the efforts somewhere where they need to, again, using civilized efforts, protect the interests of national business on internal and external markets. We used to do this work, so thanks to the government for understanding. Of course, we're going to join our efforts. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
To you, we know that France, has been always historically playing a very sophisticated balance of domestic support for its private sector and also, as a global player, important global player, not only within the EU, but generally, globally. First of all, does, in view of French business, free trade is the only and the best solution? And the second question is separate, because we have not much time left. What should Ukraine do, first of all, to attract more French business? Like first 2 and 3 steps that would, radically, significantly change perception of Ukraine in the eyes of the French business. Thank you.
Well, actually, about the free trade agreements, what we observe from France is that the multilateral agreements are declining. I mean, you were talking about the TTIP. We've just signed, EU just signed the CETA with Canada. We had a huge conference last week with French companies explaining the advantages of this kind of agreements. It was not clear at the very beginning, right? Now they understood it. There is something to, there are some advantages. So definitely business has advantage with these free trade agreements in both sides. I mean, it's never all for one and the other that loses everything. No, it's both advantages. It's a win-win situation, right? And what we saw with Ukraine is already that the export from France to Ukraine have doubled. Well, they were rather low, but they're already doubled in a year. So yes, this is important, and I would like to share the mind of here of Mr. Kinar and of our EU representative about the fact that to attract and to have businesses developing in Ukraine, here there's still a lot of work to be done. I mean, this is just 2 years back from the very beginning, so we have a lot of years in front of us, but what we have to work on together, because it's not just on the Ukrainian part or the French part, but together is about, if I have one word, this is about the implementation of reforms, of course, and we were talking about harmonization of norms and standards, and this will be an advantage for Ukrainian companies. Just imagine that all Ukrainian companies reach such standards of quality of services, such as the European one, when in, I don't know how many years, but I hope very soon, everything will go well, and then the Russian market and CIS market will open again. So the Ukrainian companies will have a huge advantage on this part of the world to have new markets again. So this is the first one. And then, of course, we were talking about rates and state of law. This is one of the assets which is very important today, because all reforms are done, then you have better place in the ease of doing business by the World Bank, and this is great, but you know, we need the implementation of reforms on the ground, I mean, in the regions, locally, in the towns where our companies operate. And when it works very well, I mean, when it definitely works, so in France there is kind of buzz, and other companies will come. So this is quite important. And because we cannot forget that we're coming out from a long period of 25 years. I have this image in my mind, you know, it just when you are a wife and husband, and either the wife or the husband has been cheating on the other, and just saying all the time, no, I won't cheat anymore, I won't cheat anymore. And then at the end of the day, the wife just, well, I'm a woman, right? So you tell to your husband, well, go out of here. And then another man comes and I will be a fair player, you can rely on me. But even if you like or love your new husband, he has to prove that he will be a reliable one, and he will not cheat. And this is the story between foreign investors, not only French and Ukraine, because for 25 years we have been hearing about the reforms, upcoming reforms, and ease of doing business in Ukraine, and each time it was just disappointing. So now there is a momentum when things are being done right now, already 2 years, and so many things were done. So what I want to conclude about is that these things are done, but these things are not enough known by the French private sector. And here I have a call to the Ukrainian government, state, Mr. Poroshenko. We, at KIEF, we met with all the presidents of Ukraine, predecessors, and we have always been disappointed by them. No, there is result about the reforms in Ukraine, but we've never met with Mr. Poroshenko. He didn't come to say to the private sector, come to Ukraine, look at what's going here in my country, and I want you French companies to come more, because this is a reality, this is not words, this is proof of what we're doing now, and this is the most important thing. So if we want more French companies to come in Ukraine, you have to market your efforts. I mean, what you're really doing, we have to know about it, because I can do that, but I am only French, right? We need that to be told by the head of the state, as we have a lot, I mean, each year at KIEF you have more than 100 heads of state coming and saying to the French investors, come in our country, we are doing reforms. And here you have just already packaged. The reforms are going on. So please just come and tell them, French companies, that this is a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Geraldine. Thank you for being so adamant, as well as for this comparison to personal life, and a lot of people can relate to that. Moving on to the private sector itself. Ms. Nataliya, again, global question. You were talking about mega trends. So, is free trade simply a new standard that is inevitable, or do you see obstructions? Road. And second, what are the best plans in Ukraine? If you can talk about that would be interesting to listen.
Sorry, can you just, the first question?
The first question about the free trade. You were mentioning before that you as a global company observe mega trends. So is free trade, in your opinion, just a global standard of today and tomorrow? There is no other alternative? Or do you see obstacles on the way of implementing free trade all over the world?
So, yeah, coming to the first question and also to the role what Ukraine can play here. In fact, now with the EU association agreement, what is a roadmap towards Europe opening 700 million potential, this free trade agreement and having in mind the mega trends I talked about with additional 2 billion people on top till 2050, talking about this shift away from light industries to shift away from heavy to light industries, and also talking about the geographic position of Ukraine, what we have clearly here to state. I mean, this is strategically ideal positioned. And Ukraine, in this regard, can act here as a transportation corridor, and that's not only between China and Europe. So at the moment, I'm also responsible for Georgia, and at the moment there are huge projects ongoing in Georgia, Nataliya port, building their roads and railways in order to make this Silk Road as one corridor will be also Georgia happen. And of course here also Ukraine will play a significant role in the future. Odessa port connecting then basically also east and west. But also, if we are looking now what's happening in other regions of the world. So I'm also very often in contact with my colleagues from Africa and Turkey. And here, Ukraine, and the Middle East also, here can Ukraine also play such an important role in the future as a trading hub and a transportation corridor that I have often the feeling this potential is far not used. Yeah? Additionally, coming back to what I said, 2 billion people on Earth, free trade is developing, and we should not forget that here in the country there are almost 30% of the black soil. And we also see that climate change, and Ukraine has a fantastic location for this. Building the Dnieper like a Mississippi, you can easily bring all these goods in the entire world. So I'm not talking about the next 1 or 2 years. I'm thinking a bit long term, 10, 15, 20 years. And with this, definitely Ukraine is fantastically positioned with its great people, having a great mindset, good educated. And of course, you mentioned some topics, what are happening, and people are leaving Ukraine in order to work in Poland and Germany. Yes, that happens, but they will also come back, bring a lot of knowledge here. And we have seen this also in Turkey, what happens there when Germans are coming Turkish people back to Germany. They bring new modernization into the country. So there's huge potential behind this.
The second question was about BASF plans for Ukraine. If you can tell us something about it.
Okay, so let me just refer to this briefly. So BASF is one of the leading chemical companies in the world with more than 150 years tradition. And here in Ukraine, we have been almost from the very first day here. Since 25 years, we are here present. And it's no matter of statistics, but as said, we as BASF, we feel daily the pulse of the industry. So our chemistry is going everywhere what is used in daily life and also for other products. So, and we see, I would like really to use this word, tectonic shifts. So we have 150 employees here, they are serving the markets. But I decided recently I will not only continue with our sales colleagues, I now hired 3 scouts. They are just driving through the country because there are a lot of things ongoing in the country which are not documented in the papers or you cannot read about. You have just to look over the fence. What is happening? And I can tell you a lot of investments are happening in the country and you have to make use of this. And BASF, we are here increasing our staff, so we will increase this, and we are doing this each year, despite the crisis. And we have a long-term strategic approach towards the country. At the moment, we are selling, we have agro centers, but we are also supporting in each and every direction our customers to make them more successful. We definitely teach our customers. We have seminars and trainings programs. And of course, we also consider investing here, becoming with local production. So we are observing here possibilities in the consumer close areas where transportation costs are important, but also where it's important to be close to the customers. So there are different areas where we are at the moment looking in, observing this, and here we are quite active. But not only this, so as said, we see us as a partner for the country, as a partner for our customers, and we are supporting our customers not only with solutions and products, also with programs like financing programs. We are doing now one program with the OTP Bank together, so the different things ongoing. And yeah, we are happy to hear, and we believe as BASF here in Ukraine, and we are also proud to be part of Ukraine, and we will support Ukraine to make a success story.
Thank you for this view, and thank you for being so optimistic about our country. That's really, that means a lot to all of us. Mr. Zaika, again, I was personally surprised to hear that, a pharmaceutical company became such an important part of the value chain here in Ukraine for your corporation globally. We all know, and actually this is the theme of our conference here, that we are living already in a digitized and an automated world, and a lot of health solutions are becoming more and more digitized. Now, I don't have to tell anybody in this room, and you in particular, that Ukraine is one of the champions, global champions in IT talent, in innovative solutions. Are you planning to utilize this potential in Ukraine and to create new innovative products using Ukrainian IT talent, the pharmaceutical talent, and all of our assets for the benefit of your company?
Okay, thank you for the question. Indeed, first of all, I would like to comment on the remarks by Mr. Ambassador, and then further on the French business, on this excessive rate and basically enforcement of the law. I've been in this sector, in pharmaceutical business, for 25 years. And indeed, there were so many very, very unfortunate events, starting with the raiding of a Japanese company, then the very recent case with Sanofi fraud, and etc. But I really should state, and one should admit, that we have a tremendous improvement in, let's say, in the number of these events. Because when we were acquiring the plant, and I became managing the plant and the organization, I was just waiting when it starts. Thanks God, since 2 years, it has never started. And probably it's because we have a BRD on board, we are kind of protected, and etc. But the tendency and the trend is there. The number of these unfortunate events going lower, lower, and lower, and one should not be afraid to invest into Ukraine, because of that. There are many other things, to watch. And when it comes to this e-solution and digitalization, e-health, and etc., again, I should stress that pharma industry is a very, very regulated industry and very closed industry. Nevertheless, we have a big part of IT utilized in this industry. And when it comes, for example, from managing the ERP solution like SAP, we have on board people working for the whole group. And that's the part how we utilize these e-trends in healthcare and in pharmaceuticals. Again, when you are talking about pharmacovigilance, for example, number of people sitting and working, and it's digitalized 100%, reporting of side effects, monitoring of the drugs, and etc., etc. So we are following the trend, and we are not a part of the trend. Moreover, the group, Ukraine used to be the #1 market last year for Sino. This year we are overtaken by our South African colleagues, but we are still looking for more investment in Ukraine. We have invested 6.5 million euro, and we are supposed to invest another almost the same amount. We are expanding, we are doubling our manufacturing capacity in Ukraine in 2 years. We are building warehouse, we are building office building. So we are committed to invest, because so far, first 2 years was very, very positive.
Thank you. Well, I just have nothing to add except that I'm personally, have a very positive impression from this panel. Yeah, there are challenges ahead, but both from the political, from the private sector, and from the business association view, we're moving ahead. Looks like there is, both for Ukraine and the EU, there is no other way than to have a win-win partnership. Nobody needs anything less than that. So we have now time for questions from the floor. We have ladies who will assist us here in the room, bringing the microphones. What I would like to ask from you, you can ask questions in any in any language. You can address it to the panel or to a specific speaker. But please, when you do that, state clearly your name and company or organization affiliation. And please try to have it more of a question, not a comment, because we would like to take as many questions as we can for the next 15 minutes. So please, who wants to ask the question, please raise your hand. Who want to break the ice? Nobody wants to break the ice at these conferences. There is one? Could you please bring the microphone? Do you see? Yeah. Thank you.
Сергій Нагорний, партнер Міжнародного клубу банкірів.
Sergei Nagorny, the partner of the International Banker Club. And one can say that there are certain objective reasons, as it was mentioned by Nataliya Mykolska, as far as the growth of export with the EU countries, thanks to the free trade agreement which has been signed, which has become effective on the 1st of January last year. Using this opportunity, I'd like to emphasize that it was very well said by the representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland. And to your mind, whether in this contest in Ukraine there is a chance to strengthen its positions in the market of Finland in terms of supplying industrial products, cement, chemical products, and what are the perspectives of Ukrainian-Finnish cooperation in the peaceful nuclear energy, because Finland has a unique experience in cooperation in this area, which was mentioned by the ambassador of Finland to KIEF, and it was mentioned this year that a lot is being done in this area. Thank you very much. What do you mean? There was translation. No. There was translation. Він не чув перекладу англійському. There was translation. Yeah, there was translation. We were translating. Чому він не чув перекладу? 25 years ago, Ukraine and Finland has set up the diplomatic relations. And in this context, what are the perspectives of the cooperation?
Finland and Ukraine, if you know something about it, that would be interesting to hear.
The message for 100 years of diplomatic relations, I think that the message would be that we can have much more cooperation in the future, actually. This visit has shown it as well. We had a lot of companies with us, actually, and we had a very good business roundtable. I think that because Finland is a country of engineers, and we learned here that you have very good engineers as well, and engineers speak same language, and there are a lot of new ideas, new energy, and that is something we can together build on. As regards to the nuclear question, yes, we have quite a lot of experience of that. And in our case, it has functioned quite well. And we have enterprises, companies very much interested in helping you to get more availability of your nuclear plants, as well as to manage the nuclear waste you have. So that this is clearly one sector where we can do more together. But my basic message is that Ukraine should get its faces and voice known much more in the north. It was a surprise to me when I took the plane. I'm a bit ashamed, but this is my first time in Ukraine, that it took less time than my flight to Brussels. So that the Ukraine is very near, actually. And when you come to this city, somebody referred already that it's like mini Paris, so that there must be more opportunities for tourism, for example. So my message for the next years is a positive one. Let's have more contacts, let's have more cooperation, and let's build a bit better world together.
Thank you so much. Any more questions? Ще питання? Будь ласка, піднімайте руки. Є питання? Є там питання? Будь ласка, піднесіть мікрофон.
Good afternoon, Yuri Panchenko, and I am writing on the issues of the trade with the EU. In spite of the discussion about the possibility to cancel certain quotas for the EU, I have two questions. One to Nataliya, Mykolska. EU is not willing to revise the quotas, but the Ukraine should submit such an application, and if it is worthwhile, so when can we do that? And the question to Mr. Mingarelli, the EU is not supporting the idea of review, but this is not only the quotas, but there are lots of other issues. These quotas have been introduced quite recently, but it has been developed many, many years ago. What is the attitude of the EU? What's the attitude of the EU to modernize the agreement? Чому вони не чують?
EU is quite hesitant to review quotas and tariffs. Does it make sense for Ukrainian government to have it on the agenda and to continuously raise it before our European partners? And the question to you, Ambassador Mingarelli, was that, of course, the association agreement is not only about trade, and basically the issue is that it has been negotiated quite some time ago. Does it have to be modernized? And is there room for and the process for modernization of this agreement? So I think, Nataliya, you will answer first, right?
От дивіться, я перекладаю. I am going to give a very simple answer. For Ukraine, there is a sense to maintain the ongoing dialogue with the EU as a trade partner. And this is why we have signed the agreement, association agreement, to set up this dialogue. We have to talk openly about our concerns or about things which we cannot live with. To submit the application you were mentioning, Ukraine is not talking to submit the application, and this, format is not actually envisaged. There is a format of the negotiation, and for Ukraine to very specifically word the needs, not the revision of the association agreement, but the maybe revision of the conditions of trade in goods. And the journalists and expert community quite often says about the revision of the agreement, but we are not talking about the revision of the agreement, but the possible revision of the conditions of the access the goods to the market. And to start discussing it, Ukraine has to do a lot of homework. And on this slide, which I've demonstrated here, I told you that one of the priorities in our medium-term plan for action of the government is carrying out the evaluation of the possible perspectives of the development of trade relations of Ukraine and EU within the timeline of the next 10 years. Ukraine needs that to understand what are the prospective sectors in our relations with the EU where we don't use the potential, and maybe we have to accelerate certain reforms and do it quicker than it is envisaged by the provisions of the association agreement, free trade agreement, and where are the exclusions, exceptions, which are the impediments for the access of the Ukrainian goods to the European market. So to maintain this dialogue, Ukraine also has to have a very good, well-substantiated position, and how the European Union and European business is going to benefit from a possible revision of the conditions of trade. It's not one-way street. We are talking about the win-win situation. In some kinds of goods, we can see that there is, a demand both of Ukrainian and European business for the possible future liberalization. Thank you.
One sentence. There is no taboo in the bilateral relation between Ukraine and the EU, and therefore it's normal that each partner raise all issues of national interest, and therefore I have no problem at all when I see that Ukraine is looking at the best way, obviously, to promote its national interest in the trade relationship with the EU. Having said that, I can just repeat for the third time that if Ukraine wants to create the right condition to boost trade and investment between the EU and this country, you have to focus on two areas. To remove non-barrier to trades through regulatory convergence, and to improve the business climate, mainly through strengthening the rule of law.
Thank you, Ambassador. Any more questions? Sorry if I can see it right away because of the lights. Any questions? Yes, there is one. Please, could you please bring the microphone? Almost the last row, if I'm not mistaken.
Доброго дня. У мене питання до пані Микольської.
Ви могли б назватися, будь ласка?
The question is to Ms. Mykolska. I am Pavlo, Capital Times company. Can you hear, gentlemen, ladies? I have a specific question. Подивіться, вони чують чи ні? And European Association. Since lately, it has become known that this association has initiated the investigation of anti-dumping of the metallurgical products. And they are going, most probably, to introduce some duties on the metallurgical products. And my question is the following. How does the free trade agreement operates in the context of such events and actions? If we do not have the association similar to Eurofair, it has been founded in 1976. Who should do all these investigations, and how do we protect our own producers, manufacturers from the discriminations like this? So, Nataliya, how we are going to protect ourselves and whether it's worthwhile? Today, the decision was published by the European Commission in this case, and we have introduced certain actions against the imports from the countries which were the parties to this investigation. And the association agreement is working with the EU because in accordance with this provision, Ukrainian manufacturers received certain opportunity to discuss with the European Commission the potential pricing obligations. Well, people who understand what is the export of metallurgical industry is that the better potential conditions, well, in comparison with the limitations of the export of these products from India and other countries. In the decision of the European Commission, there is a reference to the Article 8 of the association agreement. And this tells us that EU and Ukraine have a right to implement certain limiting activities to protect their industries. And there are no agreements which do not allow to do it in the world. And Ukraine also protects their manufacturers against the import from the EU. We have special means and anti-dumping means which deal with the products of the EU origin. And when the EU sees that these activities, these instruments were used in spite of the association agreement, it's not a problem because they want to restore the competition in the market. You've quite properly raised the issue. As a rule, such investigations are being initiated not by the manufacturers, but they are initiated by the associations.
And that is why I'm coming back to the first item I was naming, and then Anatoly just confirmed my words. there is such issue in the developing Ukraine, this industrial or sectoral associations, because USPP or Chamber of Commerce, these are the associations of businessmen, entrepreneurs and producers. But it is important to have sectoral initiatives. The association of, I don't know, footwear producers, association of, I don't know, plastic windows. And in Ukraine, as for metallurgy products, there is an association of metallurgy producers with which we are working, and with which we also worked in the framework of this investigation, presented a joint position of Ukraine, so that the measures taken at the market of the European Union could actually be working for the Ukrainian producers. But I also started saying things that we started from protectionist moves in the world are growing. The number of investigations and the number of potential measures against import in the world are also going to grow. And our main task here is not to sit there on the edge. And if Ukrainian business has certain reservations, and if there are some questions about what's happening to import to the country, then we have to come in and talk about it. And we have to look for the ways how do we protect it, but without harm for Ukrainian consumer, because any limiting things also have the potential influence on the price of the goods on Ukrainian consumer. Okay, thanks a lot, Nataliya. We're just ideally finishing the panel, even though we did delay with the beginning. We did to finish in time. We don't want to keep everyone before lunch because this is also very important. I really want all of us to thank the panelists for the great panel. I think that everything was really lively, interesting, sincere, informative, and we'll see you